One of the common questions I get asked from people who are thinking about starting a record label or who have just started a record label is, do I need to register my business? Do I need to register my record label as a business? Do I need to form an LLC for my record label? It's a great question. It's a question I hear all the time. It's kind of a boring thing. It's something that we need to talk about. But I'm not really the person who should be talking about it. We should talk to a music attorney. Good news, I have a friend. Joining me in today's episode is Cassandra Spangler, who's a New York City music attorney. And I've asked her a bunch of questions regarding forming an LLC, like how arduous is it? Is it something we need to do right away? Is it something we can get away with not doing? How much is it going to cost? Most of the answers in today's episode is kind of focused at Americans. I think LLC is kind of an exclusive, an American thing. We don't really have the same thing here in Canada. Wherever country you're in, I'm not sure how it's going to work, but you might still find this helpful. But today's information is very relevant to Americans. However, as we'll learn, it varies from state to state. So you can actually ask Cassandra a question. She's in our directory. Just go to otherrecordlabels.com/directory, or you can look for a music attorney in your state. I'm going to keep all the notes from today's episode at otherrecordlabels.com/LLC, including a frequently asked questions and some other resources I have there for record labels. So the link is in the description below. That's otherrecordlabels.com/LLC. So let's get Cassandra to define the first question, which is, what is an LLC?
LLC stands for Limited Liability Company. It's a relatively new business entity type. It's kind of similar to a corporation from a legal perspective, because you do get that limitation of personal liability, but it's a little bit more flexible than a corporation. So corporations typically are very formal. The requirements, you have to have certain meetings and votes have to be taken on things and lots of records that need to be kept. Whereas with LLCs, there's typically less of those type of formalities involved. So usually I recommend to people, if they're deciding between a corporation and an LLC, that if it's one or two or three owners, it may be easier for them to do an LLC than a corporation. Whereas if it's a situation where they want to be able to offer at some point equity to investors, it may be easier to do a corporation. But in general, that's what it is. It's very similar to a corporation, and it's just a specific type of a business entity.
Okay, let's look at things from a liability perspective. What are the actual benefits of having an LLC or registering your business as a record label?
So from a legal perspective, the primary benefit is that it limits your personal liability. So what that means is that if there's a lawsuit over something related to the music, whether it's a copyright infringement lawsuit, or if someone gets hurt at a concert and then the artist gets sued, if you're doing things through the LLC, and there are some limited exceptions to this, but in general, if you're keeping everything separate, you're keeping all of the money separate, the contracts are in the name of the LLC, then it can really help to protect your personal assets. So if the artist owns a house and they get sued for something related to their music, it's much more difficult for them to lose their house in the lawsuit if everything was done separately through an LLC. So usually I tell people if either they are someone who has a day job and has, a salary that they're earning from a day job, or owns a home or owns other assets, or if they are artists that are established enough that they are earning significant income through their music, those two groups of people are really the ones that should focus on setting up an LLC.
I feel like a lot of us and a lot of people that I speak to are actually just looking for legitimacy, or the perceived legitimacy that an LLC or registering your business gives you. Do you think that's true?
Yes, I would say that's definitely true. I mean, personally, I'm always a little skeptical if, let's say I have a client that's an artist and someone offers them some type of a recording contract and it's in the name of the owner of the company's personal name versus a company name. I'm a little skeptical of it because, it does come with some level of legitimacy.
Before we move on, I just want to give a shout out to my friends. Cassandra is awesome. It's great to have friends in the music industry. I also have another friend who runs a company called Infinite Catalog, and Infinite Catalog is the sponsor of today's video. So Cassandra focuses on music attorney and law for record labels, and Infinite Catalog focuses on royalty management for record labels. And this is like an online software. It's an incredible tool, and it exists for record labels of all sizes, whether you're making like $10 a month or you're making $10,000 a month. Infinite Catalog provides a super easy way to keep track of all the revenue that you're making as a record label, keeping your artists in the loop, and making sure that everyone gets paid fairly. Go to infinitecatalog.com and go to infinitecatalog.com/other record labels for a free demo and a discount from us. Now, back to talking about LLCs. I'm in Canada and we don't really have LLCs. So I'm wondering if this term is relevant to people outside of America.
Yeah, I don't know if it exists in other countries. It's relatively new here, and it varies a lot. So I always caution people, it's very state specific in the United States. So every state has their own requirements for LLCs. And I only set up LLCs in New York, but every state is very different. And in particular, there can be very different tax requirements. So some states, it's very inexpensive to set up an LLC in that state. So a lot of people do it, and then they come to find out it's so inexpensive to set it up because there are these very expensive annual taxes. So you want to make sure that you speak to your accountant and your attorney in whatever state you're creating the LLC to make sure you understand what the tax implications will be and what the requirements and the startup costs for an LLC in that state will be.
Some of you out there, and this is true for me when I started my record label, it was just a side project. It was just a fun little hobby. It wasn't necessarily serious when I got going. And so registering my business or getting an LLC seemed a little bit like overkill. So is it necessary? Is it something we need to do right away, especially for labels who are trying to keep their expenses low in the early days?
I would say, really it comes down to if they have assets separate from their music. If they do, I would recommend doing it right away just to protect those personal assets. The other benefit of doing it early is that you avoid having to transfer everything over later. So if you decide to start as a sole proprietor and then later on you want to start to create an LLC, then there's a lot of paperwork that has to be done to kind of transfer everything over to the LLC. So doing it early will avoid that headache. But, make sure, again, the tax, definitely speak to an accountant and find out what the tax implications will be. Because I've had people that rush to set up an LLC and then, they're owing these annual taxes and they're not, which are more than in some cases what they're earning. So definitely figure all that stuff out. A lot of people, for whatever reason, think they should set up the company in Delaware, or there's some other states, I think South Dakota, Nevada, because these are states that have laws that are very friendly to corporations and LLCs. But at the end of the day, unless when people say they're friendly to corporations, they're referring to giant multinational, Coca-Cola and places like that. So it doesn't, don't assume that because you're hearing Delaware is a good place to start a company, that makes sense for you as, somebody who's starting up a music company. Doesn't necessarily mean that.
So I kind of take that from what Cassandra said to mean we don't necessarily need to be so quick to set things up, because you could be paying some annual fees before your record label is even making money. It's something we should probably do fairly early, but maybe not necessarily right away. Again, don't take my advice, but I feel like there is this like little research phase that maybe it's up to a year. Again, don't take my advice, but maybe up to a year where you're kind of researching everything before you actually go ahead and register your record label. Okay, so let's find out, how do we actually go ahead and set up an LLC?
So in New York, it's a two-step process. New York has higher startup costs for LLCs than other states, but pretty low annual fees. So in New York, it's a two-step process. The first step would be to file paperwork with the state of New York to create the LLC, which is a pretty simple process. And the filing fee, I think, is $200. So it's not too crazy. The second step of the process is where it gets a little more expensive. So that is what they call the publication requirement. So you may have noticed, sometimes in the back of the newspaper, you'll see these notices. They call it a fictitious business statement. Basically just says this person is forming an LLC under this name. And it's really just a formality, but you have to, in New York, run that notice in 2 separate newspapers for 6 weeks. And that's where it gets very expensive, especially any of the counties within New York City. That part of the process can run, $1,000 to $2,000 for the publication. And many other states don't require that second step. So you would be eliminating those additional fees in other states.
And what type of annual costs are we looking at?
So that varies by state. There will be income taxes, and that's something to speak with the accountant about. But some states also have a minimum tax on LLCs, so an amount that is owed regardless, even if the company made $0 in revenue that year. So that's what you want to watch out for. I don't really handle tax stuff. I usually refer people to accountants, but I don't think there's a minimum tax in New York. If there is, I think it's pretty reasonable. And then in terms of the registration, you're just required in New York to renew it every 2 years. And that is a very low fee. I think it's $9 or something. So in New York, you pay a little bit more at the beginning, but you can end up saving later.
Now, like I said before, it's kind of helpful to question whether or not we should do this right away from the very beginning. But what happens if we do register an LLC and we have that entrepreneurial seizure, which I talked about in a previous episode, and we get all excited about starting our record label, but then we realize we're not really ready yet. We want to take a little more time to do more research and to take some courses. So can we pause our LLC while we get things organized?
I don't know that there's a way to pause it, although if there's no income that's being earned, depending on the state, there may not be much that needs to be done in those years that it's not active. But that's another good point where sometimes people create these LLCs and then they stop using it and it just sits there. You want to make sure that if you're no longer using it and you're not planning to start using it again, that it's properly dissolved, and otherwise that can catch up to you too.
Now, some of you might be thinking, what if I don't have an LLC I've been running for a few years? Am I safe? Can I be legal? Can I register all my income or report all my income as a sole proprietor? So can I be legal without an LLC, still be on the up and up, but not have an LLC?
So that also varies from state to state in the US. But in general, if you're doing business under a name other than your legal name, you have to register for what they call a DBA. Which stands for doing business as. And this way people are able to, it's registered with the state. It's usually a simpler process than setting up an LLC. And I don't think there are ongoing requirements for it. It's just so that the public is aware, if this person is signing contracts under this name that they made up, they're able to look it up and see who it really is.
One thing that confuses me, and I've heard from a lot of our folks out there, is like, if I get an LLC, is it the same as registering your trademark? Like, is the trademark of my business protected? There's
a lot of confusion. Yeah, that's something that comes up commonly, that question. A lot of people think that setting up the LLC in the name somehow gives them the trademark, or that's enough for them to get the trademark. And it's actually 2 completely separate things. Same thing with domain names. A lot of people, for some reason, think if they have the domain name, that's the trademark. And so the LLC is really just creating this business entity formally with the state. It has nothing to do with the trademark. The trademark protects the name that you're using as a brand, that you are using to sell your products and services. So oftentimes the name of the record label, for example, might be the same as the LLC, and that might be the brand name. And so you may want to apply for a trademark of the name of your record label, which may also be the name of the LLC. But setting up the LLC by itself is not sufficient for you to get the trademark. You have to actually be doing business under that name. And sometimes they are different. Sometimes people set up the LLC in a totally different name than what they're doing business under, and in which case they would then get a DBA for the LLC. So if it's called, I don't know, the record company LLC, but they're doing business as New York Records, they would file a DBA for the LLC.
Okay, that's all. Thanks to our friend Cassandra. You can find out more about Cassandra by going to otherrecordlabels.com/directory, where we have not just her, but all of our businesses and companies that we trust to help record labels. And you can find them at otherrecordlabels.com/directory, including our friends at Infinite Catalog, the sponsor of today's video, who will help you with your royalty accounting. I hope you found it's helpful. It's a little dry. It's a little bit of a topic that isn't as sexy and exciting as signing bands or pressing vinyl. But these are the important things that are really helpful to know, and they're going to protect us as record label owners, and we're going to protect our artists as well. Go to otherrecordlabels.com/LLC, where you can get more information on how to register your record label and how to grow your record label. Thanks for watching.